Welcome back to the Editing Basics series. If you missed the first two videos, I'm going to link them in the description below. In the first video, we gave an overview of the editing process, and then we talked about phase 1, the resting stage. Now we're moving on to phase 2, which is developmental editing. Developmental editing is also known as structural editing or high-level editing. Basically, it is a bird's view of your manuscript. It's the big picture. With developmental editing, we're focusing on things like character development, we're fixing plot holes, we're looking at continuity and pacing issues. We're evaluating the overall structure of the manuscript. Why do we do this first? Well, imagine spending hours fine-tuning a chapter, making it perfect, doing all the little line edits, catching the typos, and then realizing that chapter does not fit into the overall structure of your narrative and having to cut it. Basically, we're trying to efficiently utilize our time and stay away from having to make decisions like that. We get the structure in place first before we ever start looking at close, low-level edits. If you're going to make any changes to setting, characters, maybe you want to add in a character, combine characters. If you're going to make any big changes that affect the entire manuscript, now is the time. We know what we're looking for. How do we go about doing this? What are the methods? It's going to be different for every author and for every manuscript, and a lot of it depends on your drafting style. Do you already have an outline? Do you have pages on pages of notes about your characters and settings? That's going to affect the way you approach this stage. If you do not have a lot of preliminary material, then a good idea might be to do an initial read-through and make notes about your manuscript. Basically, this initial read-through would be from a reader's perspective, and you're not making notes necessarily on things that you want to change. You're just getting the lay of the land. When you're working with structural changes, it really helps to have some sort of outline or something similar. Maybe you have note cards with synopses for each scene or chapter. Maybe you have a chalkboard that lays everything out. Maybe you have color-coded scraps of paper pinned to a clothesline. Whatever works for you, that's what you do. But the main point is that it is good to have a reference that you can rely on when making these structural changes. Because of course it's difficult to thumb through your manuscript looking for a specific scene. Personally, I'm a big Scrivener user, so I like to utilize the corkboard feature. But again, whatever works for you. Once you have some sort of breakdown of your manuscript, then you need to go through and really take a hard look at it, decide what works and what doesn't. A huge question to ask, are you starting in the right place? 9 times out of 10, when it comes to your first draft, the answer is no. If you have a ton of exposition dump in the early chapters, you're not starting in the right place. Really look at it from a reader's perspective and think, would this first scene grab me? If not, keep reading until you find something that will. Start there and shift things around. Or write a whole new scene. This is a great time to add material if you need to do that. Another factor to take into account is your word count. While of course the word count is not the end-all be-all, it is important to know the expected length for your genre. Let me say that again, for your genre. If you're working with a 50,000 word first draft of a sci-fi novel, then you're probably going to want to think about beefing that up a little bit. And the developmental stage is the perfect place to do that. What I like to do is make a list of things that the manuscript needs, goals that are not currently being accomplished. Maybe it has to do with character development. I don't see enough of a particular character. Maybe it has to do with plot holes. Maybe it's pacing. You might need to slow down an area or speed up a section. Maybe it has to do with world building. You don't get enough of the atmosphere. Whatever it may be, write down the problems, make a list, and then come up with solutions. And then you can take your layout, whatever it is, your outline, your clothesline, and find places where you can make those changes, go in, make the changes to the text, and just keep playing around until you're happy with it. This is the developmental phase. It is not necessarily a single pass. You may have one pass, you may have 12 passes, it just depends. The big thing to take from this video is that you want to do high-level stuff first. Avoid the temptation to focus in on typos and those little small issues. if you come across one and you want to fix it and it's just glaring at you and you have to do it, go ahead. It's not a big deal. But if you really key in on that low-level stuff, then you're going to get in that mind frame and you're going to miss the big picture stuff, which is what you're looking for at this stage. And that's phase 2. A quick review. Phase 2, developmental editing, also known as high-level editing or structural editing. The goal in this phase is to make all big picture edits, solidify the structure of your manuscript. It could take 1 pass, it could take 50. And then you get to move on to phase 3. More about that coming next time. I hope you're enjoying this series so far. Let me know in the comments, what are your methods and techniques for developmental editing? And share this with anyone you think it might help. I mentioned before I'm making this series because I've noticed a lack of this sort of basic information about editing. So I want this to be a resource for writers diving into editing for the first time, or even more experienced writers looking for a refresher. Don't forget to give it a thumbs up if you liked it, subscribe, and I'll see you next time.